The morning air in Providence carried the sharp cold of early March. Inside the municipal courthouse, Judge Frank Caprio prepared for another Tuesday session, the routine mixture of traffic violations and minor infractions that formed the daily rhythm of municipal justice. At 10:15 a.m., the courtroom doors opened with unmistakable authority. Fire Chief Daniel Morrison didn't simply walk into the room, he commanded it. At 42, Morrison stood 6'2" with the build of someone who still trained as if fighting fires on the front lines. His Providence Fire Department dress uniform was immaculate, every crease razor-sharp, every button polished to a mirror shine. Across his chest, 5 rows of service ribbons told the story of 2 decades of firefighting, including 3 life-saving medals that caught the courtroom lights. But it wasn't just the uniform that demanded attention. It was Morrison's bearing, shoulders pulled back, chin elevated just slightly too high, movements precise and deliberate but lacking any trace of humility. On his left hip, prominently displayed, his fire department badge served as a visible reminder of his authority and status. His face carried the weathered confidence of a man accustomed to being called a hero. When he removed his fire chief's cap, the gesture was practiced, authoritative, but not humble. As Morrison approached the defendant's stand, each step of his polished leather shoes clicked against the courtroom floor, announcing his presence with certainty. He rested one hand on the railing casually, as if claiming territory rather than answering charges. What Morrison didn't realize was that he was about to face Judge Frank Caprio, who had handled over 400,000 cases in 35 years on the bench, and could identify abuse of authority within seconds. But here's what nobody in that courtroom knew yet. This case wasn't really about a parking violation. It was about a pattern of behavior that the Providence Fire Department had been quietly trying to address for months. In the back row, Deputy Chief Maria Santos had slipped in to watch, deeply concerned about what she knew was coming. Chief Daniel Morrison, the court clerk announced, violation of Rhode Island General Law, Title 31, Section 27 and 19, unauthorized use of emergency vehicle. Judge Caprio looked up with those experienced eyes that had learned to read people in 3 seconds. He saw Morrison's posture, the displayed badges, the subtle arrogance. "Chief Morrison," Judge Caprio began, his voice measured, "you're charged with parking a fire department vehicle, SUV 3 assigned to your office, in a no-parking zone on Benefit Street on February 28th at 2:47 p.m. The fine is $85. How do you plead?" What happened next made the court clerk's fingers freeze on her keyboard. "Your Honor," Morrison began, condescension barely concealed, "I'm pleading not guilty because this citation represents a fundamental misunderstanding of fire department operational protocols and the authority granted to command-level personnel under Emergency Services Statute 23 to 28.6. Judge Caprio set down his pen slowly, that gesture that signals someone has just made a serious miscalculation. "Chief Morrison, were you responding to an emergency at the time?" "Your Honor, fire chiefs maintain constant operational readiness. We don't simply respond to emergencies. We prevent them through strategic positioning. It's a concept that requires understanding emergency management complexities." The subtle condescension hung in the air like smoke. Judge Caprio's eyes narrowed slightly. "Chief Morrison, were you, at 2:47 p.m., actively responding to a fire, medical emergency, or any situation requiring immediate emergency response?" Morrison's jaw tightened, the first crack in his confidence. "Your Honor, I was conducting official fire department business." "Official business? Can you describe the nature of this business?" "I was meeting with a city official regarding fire safety compliance." "I see. And which city official were you meeting with?" Morrison hesitated, barely half a second, but Judge Caprio caught it. "That's a private matter, Your Honor. I don't see how it's relevant. Morrison had just told a judge that he doesn't get to determine relevance in his own courtroom. Actually, Chief Morrison, what's relevant in my courtroom is determined by me. Now, official government business isn't private. Which city official were you meeting with? Morrison's hands gripped the railing. Your Honor, I believe my meeting schedule falls under executive confidentiality. Executive confidentiality, Judge Caprio repeated slowly. Chief Morrison, you're not the president. You're a municipal fire chief. Either this was official business, in which case you can tell me who you met, or it was personal, in which case you had no authorization to use a city vehicle. Which is it? Morrison's face flushed. Your Honor, I resent the implication. I've served this city for 20 years. I've saved lives. I have 3 life-saving medals and commendations from 5 mayors. I think my record speaks to my character. Morrison had just played the hero card, suggesting that past service should exempt him from current accountability. Chief Morrison, Judge Caprio said, his tone like a disappointed father. Your service record is admirable, but your medals don't answer why you were parked illegally on Benefit Street at 2:47 p.m. Who were you meeting with? The silence stretched. Morrison looked around, his eyes briefly meeting Deputy Chief Santos in the back row. What he saw there, embarrassment and resignation, deflated him. Your Honor, I'd prefer not to disclose. So you're refusing to answer? That's not what I meant. Then answer the question, Chief. Morrison's voice dropped. The meeting was personal in nature. So it wasn't official business? Not in the technical sense. But as fire chief, I maintain relationships that benefit the department. Even when not conducting specific business, I'm always representing the department's interests. Judge Caprio leaned forward. So, let me understand. You took a city vehicle for personal business, but argue that because you're always representing the department, your personal business counts as official. Is that correct? Morrison heard his logic repeated in plain language and realized the absurdity. Your Honor, you're oversimplifying. No, Chief, I'm clarifying. But I'll give you one more chance. Where on Benefit Street were you parked and who were you visiting? Morrison knew he was trapped. I was parked outside 247 Benefit Street. And who resides there? The question landed like a bomb, because Judge Caprio clearly already knew the answer. Sarah Castellano. And who is Sarah Castellano? Morrison's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. She's the wife of Councilman Robert Castellano. The courtroom erupted. People turned to each other, whispering urgently. Deputy Chief Santos dropped her head into her hands. The court clerk's mouth fell open. Judge Caprio let the moment breathe, allowing the implications to settle. So, to be clear, at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, you took a city vehicle, told your office you were conducting official business, and drove to a city councilman's wife's private residence. Correct? Yes, Your Honor. And what was the nature of your visit? I don't see how that's relevant to parking. Chief Morrison, you've argued your city vehicle use was justified because of city business. Now I'm asking what that business was. Either answer or admit you were using city resources for unauthorized purposes. Morrison's voice cracked. I was meeting Mrs. Castellano regarding a personal matter. What kind of personal matter requires a city vehicle in the middle of a workday at a councilman's residence? Your Honor, I'd rather not discuss this in open court. But you came prepared to argue your use was justified. You referenced your medals, your relationships with officials. So now answer my questions or I'll hold you in contempt. Morrison was fully flushed now, visibly shaking. We were having a personal conversation. What kind? Morrison's next words were barely audible. Mrs. Castellano and I have been seeing each other for the past 6 months. The courtroom erupted into chaos, people gasping, talking over each other. Santos stood and quickly exited. Judge Caprio let the noise die down naturally before speaking again, his voice cutting through the remaining whispers. So, let me understand, Chief Morrison. For 6 months, you've been having an affair with Councilman Castellano's wife. You've regularly used city vehicles to visit her during work hours. And when cited, rather than pay the fine, you decided to fight it by claiming emergency authority and official business. Morrison stood, frozen, unable to respond. In fighting this $85 ticket, you've now admitted under oath to misuse of city property, abuse of position, and an affair representing a massive conflict of interest given the councilman's oversight of your department's budget. But Judge Caprio wasn't finished. Chief Morrison, I took the liberty of making phone calls before today's hearing. Morrison's eyes went wide with fear. I spoke with Deputy Chief Santos yesterday. She provided information about internal complaints filed against you over 8 months. Complaints about resource abuse, inappropriate conduct, and using your position to intimidate subordinates who questioned your behavior. Morrison looked sick. Furthermore, I spoke with the City Ethics Commissioner, who informed me of 3 separate anonymous complaints that mysteriously disappeared before investigation. Judge Caprio paused, letting the weight settle. And, most interesting, I spoke this morning with Councilman Castellano. Morrison's face went completely white. He didn't know about his wife's affair until I called him an hour ago. But what's fascinating is what else he told me. Judge Caprio stood, his full authority on display. You've been pressuring him for months to approve an unnecessary equipment purchase from a vendor owned by your brother-in-law. When he started asking questions, you threatened him. You told him you had connections throughout government, and it would be unfortunate if questions about his personal life became public. The courtroom was absolutely silent. You've been blackmailing a city councilman, Chief Morrison, using your affair with his wife as leverage to approve corrupt equipment purchases. And when you got this parking ticket, you were so arrogant you decided to fight it, rather than pay, and keep your misconduct hidden. Morrison was visibly shaking. Your Honor, please, I can explain. Explain what? How you betrayed your oath. How you used heroism as a shield for corruption. How you thought threatening a councilman would go unpunished because you have medals. Judge Caprio walked directly in front of Morrison, his voice carrying moral weight. You walked in here wearing that uniform with pride, displaying those medals prominently, referencing 20 years of service as if they granted immunity. But you've demonstrated that sometimes the most dangerous public servants are those who believe heroism in one area excuses corruption in others. He paused, making eye contact. You saved lives, Chief. That's real. That's admirable. Those medals represent genuine bravery. But they don't represent a license to cheat, steal, blackmail, or abuse your position. Judge Caprio returned to his bench. Chief Morrison, I am finding you guilty of the parking violation. The $85 fine is now $2,500 because of your attempted deception. Furthermore, I'm holding you in contempt for your refusal to answer questions and attempts to intimidate judicial proceedings. That's an additional $1,500. Morrison swayed on his feet. But more importantly, I'm referring this entire matter to the Rhode Island Attorney General's Office for Criminal Investigation into Misconduct in Office, Abuse of Public Resources, and Attempted Blackmail. I'm forwarding a complete transcript to the fire department with my judicial recommendation that you be immediately suspended pending full internal affairs investigation. And I'm notifying the City Ethics Commission to investigate how 3 ethics complaints against you disappeared. Judge Caprio's voice took on a tone of profound disappointment. Chief Morrison, 20 years ago, you took an oath to serve and protect. Today, you've revealed that somewhere along the way, you stopped serving and started taking. You stopped protecting and started exploiting. You stopped being a public servant and became someone who used heroism as camouflage for corruption. He picked up his gavel. Your badges and medals represent real sacrifices by real heroes, but you've tarnished them by hiding behind them while betraying everything they represent. This court is adjourned. The gavel came down with finality. As Morrison stood, barely able to remain upright, the courtroom doors burst open. Deputy Chief Santos re-entered, followed by 3 Providence police detectives and an assistant attorney general. Chief Daniel Morrison, a detective, announced, "You're under arrest for misconduct in office, theft of services, and attempted extortion of a public official." The courtroom watched in stunned silence as Morrison, still wearing his metal-covered uniform, was handcuffed and read his Miranda rights. As he was led past Judge Caprio's bench, Morrison looked up. "Your Honor," he said, his voice broken, "I'm sorry." "I know," Judge Caprio replied quietly. "But sorry doesn't undo the damage, Chief. You had every opportunity to do the right thing. You chose to compound mistakes with threats and deception. Now you'll face the consequences." Within 3 hours, local news stations broadcast Morrison's arrest. The Providence Journal's headline read, "Hero Fire Chief Arrested After Courtroom Confession." The City Council held an emergency session that evening. Councilman Castellano gave an emotional statement about Morrison's threats and blackmail attempts. The equipment purchase Morrison had pushed would have cost taxpayers $3.7 million for trucks that experts said were overpriced by $800,000. Morrison's brother-in-law's company would have received a $200,000 commission. "It wasn't just an affair," Castellano told the council, his voice shaking. "It was a conspiracy to defraud taxpayers, a scheme using my personal life as leverage. This man wore a hero's uniform while conducting himself like a criminal." Within 24 hours, Morrison was placed on unpaid leave. Santos was named acting fire chief. An independent investigation revealed that Morrison had cultivated relationships with city officials, using his heroic reputation to build political capital. When Joe questioned, he'd reference his medals, his service, his connections, the implicit message being, "I'm untouchable." 2 weeks after his arrest, Morrison appeared in Superior Court for arraignment. Gone was the pristine uniform, replaced by an ill-fitting suit. Gone was the confident posture, replaced by hunched shoulders. He pleaded not guilty. But the evidence was overwhelming. City vehicle logs, Santos's testimony, recordings of threatening calls to Castellano, and most damning, his own sworn testimony in Judge Caprio's courtroom. Morrison's attorney negotiated a plea deal. He would plead guilty to misconduct and theft of resources in exchange for dropping the extortion charges. Morrison would serve 18 months, pay $47,000 in restitution for vehicle misuse, forfeit his pension, and be permanently barred from public office or employment in Rhode Island. At sentencing, Morrison made a brief statement. "I betrayed the trust of citizens I swore to serve. I betrayed firefighters who served under my command and deserved better leadership. I betrayed the values those medals were supposed to represent. I thought my past heroism gave me permission to cut corners, bend rules, put my personal interests ahead of public duties. I was wrong." Acting Chief Santos held a department-wide meeting. "I know Morrison's arrest shook your faith in leadership," she told the assembled firefighters. "But understand something. His heroism was real. The lives he saved were real. The fires he fought were real. But that doesn't excuse what he became." She paused, looking at the faces of men and women who had served under Morrison. "We wear these uniforms because we've earned public trust. Every time we respond, every time we put ourselves in danger, we reinforce that trust. What Morrison did was use that trust as a shield for corruption. He took respect you earned through bravery and exploited it for personal benefit." Santos outlined new policies: complete transparency in vehicle usage, mandatory ethics training, regular audits, and a clear message that heroism in fighting fires doesn't grant permission to break laws or abuse authority elsewhere. The firefighters gave her a standing ovation. 6 months later, Judge Caprio received a letter from a young firefighter named James Chen, who had been present that day. "Your Honor," it began, "I wanted to thank you for what you did. Chief Morrison was my hero. When I heard he was arrested, I was devastated. But then I watched the hearing recording. I heard how you held him accountable while acknowledging his genuine service. I realized real heroism isn't about being perfect. It's about being accountable. The badge and medals don't make you special. They make you responsible. Thank you for teaching me that before I made Morrison's mistakes." Judge Caprio kept that letter in his desk. Years later, when asked about the case, he would read it to visitors. "This is why we hold people accountable. Not to destroy them, but to preserve the integrity of systems good people depend on. Morrison saved lives, and those lives are still saved. But if we'd let him continue using heroism as an excuse for corruption, eventually he would have destroyed the institution he claimed to serve." The video of the hearing was viewed over 3.8 million times in the first month. Police and fire academies used it as a teaching tool about the warning signs of corruption, the dangers of believing heroism grants immunity, and the importance of maintaining ethical boundaries regardless of accomplishments. The Providence Fire Department under Santos became a model for accountability and transparency. 5 years after his release, Daniel Morrison took a job as a construction worker in a small Rhode Island town. He lived quietly, avoided publicity, and worked hard to rebuild his life. The medals that once covered his chest were packed in a box in his attic, symbols of a past life and lessons learned too late. For Judge Caprio, the Morrison case was simply another day of holding people accountable with fairness and clarity, regardless of status. When reporters asked about it, his response was characteristically simple. "Chief Morrison thought his medals made him special. I had to remind him that in a courtroom, everyone is equal. The badge doesn't grant privileges, it creates responsibilities. And when someone in authority abuses that authority, consequences must be swift and certain. Otherwise, we're not a nation of laws. We're a nation of men who believe their past justifies their present. And that's dangerous." The case stands as a testament that heroism and accountability are not contradictory values. They are complementary. True heroes understand that respect earned through service must be maintained through continued integrity. The moment they see accomplishments as immunity from rules rather than reasons to uphold them, they stop being heroes and become cautionary tales. And that's what Daniel Morrison became. Not a villain, but a cautionary tale about what happens when someone confuses the uniform with the person wearing it. When medals become shields instead of reminders of responsibility, and when a career built on service collapses under corruption that should never have been tolerated. In the end, Judge Caprio's handling of the case reinforced a fundamental truth. No amount of past heroism exempts anyone from present accountability. The badges we wear and the medals we earn create obligations, not privileges. And when we forget that distinction, we don't just fail ourselves. We fail everyone who depends on the integrity of the institutions we serve.